Hello everybody, welcome to the JScientific YouTube channel. This is the first video on our channel and we're going to kick it off with an introduction into cellular biology. So let's dig in. Cells are the basic unit of all life. All biotic factors of life are made of cells. So what are biotic factors and is there anything else? So yeah, there's abiotic factors and there's biotic factors. Biotic factors are the things in life that are living. For example, an animal or a coral, or when you're referencing an abiotic factor, you want to try to be specific. In science, you always want to be specific with what you're talking about. You don't want to just say the organism. What organism are you referring to? You can be referring to a protist, or you can be referring to a fungi. And those are both different. A protist is unicellular and a fungi is multicellular. So you got to be careful what you're saying. So when you're referencing something that's biotic, you want to say living factors. So if you had to give an example, a lizard is a biotic factor. It's living. An abiotic factor would be something that's non-living. So what's a non-living thing that's common in our environment? Well, let's walk outside. Wind, water, there's many different things in our world that's abiotic and many different things that are biotic. So let's take a look at some of the more in-depth history of cells. In 1838, Matthias Schleiden concluded that all plants are made of cells. Matthias Schleiden was a German botanist, and he concluded that all plants are made of cells. So what does this mean? This means that all plants have cells. There are plant cells and there are animal cells. In 1839, Theodor Schwann concluded that all animals are made of cells. So he obviously observed animal cells because animals are made of animal cells and plants are made of plant cells. In 1855, Rudolf Virchow concluded that new cells can be produced only from division of existing cells. So a cell that's non-existent cannot just reproduce. Nothing arises from anything non-living. So that would be abiogenesis. And things do not arise from non-living matter. And that is pretty much what he's trying to say. In 1855, when Rudolf Virchow concluded that all new cells can only be produced from the division of existing cells, that confirmed the suggestion by Lawrence Oken 50 years prior, who suggested pretty much the same exact thing. So the theory or suggestion that Lawrence Oken provided with us was then confirmed by Rudolf Virchow later, 50 years later. So what is the cell theory? You've probably heard it in your biology class. You probably heard you need to know the cell theory for the test. So the cell theory is all of the previous discoveries by the scientists, and it's like a summary of all of them. So all of the there's many different conclusions that many of the scientists that we haven't even reviewed some of them, and many of them. We've only reviewed about 3, I believe. So, there are many different conclusions that were created, and they were all summarized in the cell theory, which is something you need to know, and you need to know all 3 parts of the cell theory. So here's number 1. Number 1 is all living things are made of cells. There you go again, biotic organisms. All living things are made of cells, because a cell is the basic unit of all living things. Number 2, cells are the basic units of structure and function in living things. You function because of cells. Cells make up parts and every single part of all of your organs. They reproduce to make new skin. We have different types of cells that perform many different functions in our body, in our anatomy, in our physiology. Number 3, new cells are produced from existing cells. So this means that cells, like human reproduction, are able to be reproduced. And that goes through 2 different types of stages that we will discuss later, called mitosis and meiosis. And there is a difference between mitosis and meiosis. And the main is that meiosis will produce gametes and mitosis does not produce gametes, but we will discuss that later. Microscopy. So microscopy is observing cells under a microscope. We use microscopes, and the one that you probably use in your biology class or science class is a compound light microscope. A compound light microscope will have the objectives, It has a couple objectives on it, and then it will use the lens, and you will look through through the microscope, and then you can adjust the objectives, and you'll have different magnifications. And you can view very simple structures, but nothing too like you won't be able to observe like main organelles within a cell. Pretty much you can see the nucleus and different parts like that, but you're never going to really get too in depth with them. Then you have transmission electron microscopy, which is used mostly for the observation of cellular structures and then like large protein molecules. You have scanning electron microscopes, which use a pencil-like beam of electrons, and they put it right over the specimen, and they're able to observe like the surface in a 3D orientation. Like you're able to pretty much get a 3D image of the entire surface of what your specimen is. And you can see right down below, there's 3 images. You won't have to know what they are because I don't know what they are, but you can see the difference between all of them. You can see that the light microscope, you can see, it looks like little beads. The transmission electron microscope, they look like little slices. And then the scanning electron microscope, you see like they look rounded in 3D. And that's what those are. There's types of cells. Yes, there is not just one type of cell. We have the 2 main types of cells are eukaryotes and prokaryotes. A eukaryote contains a true nucleus, which encloses the nuclear DNA, which is deoxyribonucleic acid. And what happens is a eukaryote houses the DNA inside the nucleus, and it codes for the genetic material and how you classify the cell, how the cell functions. And then we have prokaryotes, which do not enclose their DNA in a nucleus. But prokaryotes, just because they don't enclose their DNA in a nucleus, does not mean that they can't function. We will take a look at that a little bit later. So if you don't know what a nucleus is, and you just hear me saying nucleus, and you're wondering what in the world the nucleus is, it's a cellular structure that contains a large membranous exterior that encases the genetic material of the cell in the form of deoxyribonucleic acid. And it is responsible for directing the cellular activity of the cell. So packaging up materials and sending them off, and many different things that we're going to look at later, like photosynthesis and things like that. So let's continue forth. Comparison of cell size, you probably won't need to know this, but you can see that DNA 2 nanometers, and you see a cold virus, typical prokaryotic cell, how many micrometers, typical eukaryotic cell, and different things like that. That's just for you to see. So prokaryotes, they're typically smaller and less complex than eukaryotes. They do not separate their genetic material within a nucleus, which means they don't separate it from the entire cell within the nucleus. That's because they don't really have a nucleus. Though they do carry out all functions associated with living things. Like I did say, they can grow, reproduce, respond to the environment, and glide along surfaces or swim through liquids. For example, bacteria are prokaryotic, and we should know by now that bacteria are pretty nasty things and when they get inside the body. Eukaryotes are typically larger and more complex than prokaryotes. The reason that eukaryotes are more complex is because they have dozens of internal membranes and structures, and those structures are highly specialized for specific functions, and it's like a little factory in there. Let's take a look at the nucleus. The nucleus separates the genetic material from the rest of the cell. That's contrary to what the prokaryote does. A great variety of eukaryotes are protists, which are unicellular or other multicellular organisms such as plants, animals, and fungi. You can look at the selfies of these eukaryotes and prokaryotes. And looking at the eukaryotes, we can see that we have an animal cell and a plant cell. They do differ in many different ways, which we'll look at later in the next video, which should be up tomorrow. In the next video, we're going to be discussing organelles and structures within a cell. And you can see that that plant cell differs from its shape, and you can see that big rectangular structure. Well, it's not rectangular, but you see that big brown structure that goes around it, and pretty much gives the cell its shape. And that's called the cell wall, and you can tell that it differs from the animal cell, and that's one of the ways they differ. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But those are both animal cells, plant cells are both eukaryotic in that image. And then we can see on the right-hand side, we see the prokaryote. And the prokaryotic cell, you can see that how it's different. You can see that the DNA is, you see how it's all like in a squiggly pattern inside. It's just not the same. You can see the tail, flagella, and the structure of the cell is evidently different. And you can also see that the organelles within the eukaryotic cells, and then compare it to that of a prokaryotic cell, it's definitely different, and we will get into that more tomorrow. So that is going to conclude it for this video. That is the introduction to cellular biology. I hope you guys took notes. If you didn't, I do recommend you go back and pause the video, take some notes, understand it, and tomorrow we'll be back looking at structures of the cell and the way in which it functions, so the physiology and the anatomy of a cell. We're going to look at plant cells, animal cells, and prokaryotic cells, and we're going to differ them, and tomorrow's video should be a little bit longer, but I hope you enjoyed this first video, and I really hope you guys were able to take something from it, and I will catch you in the next video.